Good morning, friends. It has been so many weeks since we've gathered in person that I frankly lost track. But I do know that it was in week 2 of our social distancing that I last got to speak to you all. And our lectionary psalm that week was Psalm 23, which I loved getting the opportunity to reflect on with you all. And since then, that passage has been one that I've been continuing to meditate on, and it's been ministering to me throughout this confusing and painful time. So I was intrigued when I looked at the lectionary for this week and found that the psalm for this morning, once again, was Psalm 23. What are the odds? That's a serious question. I've never worked with the lectionary before this year, so that's a real question. If anyone knows what the odds are of getting the same passage twice, please, let me know, at me or something. Anyway, don't worry. I know that many of us are experiencing our own version of Groundhog's Day right now, but I swear I'm not going to just repeat the same homily I gave last time. But what I would like to do is just to revisit that beautiful psalm with you, that psalm that imagines God as a protective shepherd. And then we'll move on to our gospel passage for this week that focuses on who our shepherd is and what he teaches us about how we are to live. So let's begin with a reading of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. So as I said, I've been reflecting on this psalm a lot over the last couple of months. I've been particularly captured by the sentence that in the version that I memorized as a child says, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." I've been turning this phrase over and over in my mind as the death toll from this plague that we're experiencing keeps growing. This last week, we crossed the threshold in this country of 65,000 official deaths due to the novel coronavirus. One of those people was my high school Sunday school teacher. Another was a friend of my parents. I know many of you know someone who has passed or know a friend of a friend who's been touched by this virus, this plague. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. That's a word. That is a bold claim when you are as vulnerable as a sheep. The people who wrote the Bible, they came from many walks of life, but a good deal of them were farmers and shepherds. They lived from the land, and the images that resonated most with them were to do with crops and with animals, particularly sheep. This psalm, as you probably know, is attributed to King David, famously a shepherd boy before slaying a giant and becoming a warrior king. And it's no wonder that he relied on the image of the people as sheep with the Lord as their shepherd. And we shouldn't be terribly surprised that Jesus also tapped into this literary tradition when it came to explaining who he was and what his relationship to his followers was as well. And that should be a good segue to take us to our next lection for today, which is John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. It's the key passage that I'm going to be focusing on for much of the remainder of this video. But before I get into that, I'm going to follow the edict of my college New Testament Greek professor, who always declared that context is king. And therefore I'm going to back up to give you a recap of what just happened in chapter 9 before we get to John 10. And yes, I did just shamelessly drop the information that I took New Testament Greek in college. I took 2 semesters of it, actually. I got a B average, and I absolutely mastered the alphabet. And I still remember most of it, so it's pretty good. So with that, let's get on to John chapter 9. This is the story that you may remember of Jesus encountering a man who had been blind since birth. His disciples, following the theology of their culture and possibly ours, asked Jesus whose sin led to his blindness, his own or his parents'. Jesus answers that his blindness isn't because of anyone's sin, but rather it happened so that the works of God might be displayed. Jesus then does something that would horrify us who are living in the era of the coronavirus, where we're actively trying very hard to avoid everyone else's saliva, because he spit in the dirt, makes some mud, and then he put it in the blind man's eyes and then tells him to go wash in a certain pool. The man does it and suddenly has his sight. Miracle. So this immediately draws the attention of his neighbors, who had known him all his life as the blind man, or blind boy, I guess. They've known him his whole life. Anyway, they start arguing that maybe it isn't him, just a lookalike. But he's like, no, it's me. I'm the blind man. The man called Jesus, put mud on my eyes and sent me to wash, and now I can see. And they're like, okay, someone healed you, made you see. Where is he? Where is the person who healed you? And he's like, I don't know, because I was blind, so I didn't see where he went. So they decide to bring the formerly blind man to their local religious leaders to sort this whole thing out. And here is where the gospel writer drops a very important detail about this whole episode, which is that the day that Jesus performed this miracle was a Sabbath. So Jesus, the religious leaders concluded, couldn't be from God because he didn't keep the Sabbath. What follows is a very long and confusing discussion between the religious leaders and the formerly blind man about how it is that he gained his sight. At one point, they even bring in the man's parents to explain it. The parents are like, well, this is our son, and he was born blind. We don't know how he can see now, but he's an adult, so ask him. They are my favorite parents in the Bible. So they continue to go back and forth with this man, trying to get him to say that a sinner like Jesus couldn't have healed him, until they finally get so angry and frustrated that they say of Jesus, we don't even know where he comes from. To which the man replies, that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they reply, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Now, to be thrown out by the local religious leaders, that was a big deal. That was social isolation. The kind of isolation that a man who had been born blind knew all too well. It was the kind of isolation that Jesus was looking to upend with his healing and restoration ministry. So when he heard that the man he healed had been thrown out, he was definitely going to have words with these religious leaders. And that brings us, at long last, to our passage for this morning, John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Okay, so quick recap of first century sheep herding practices. A sheep pen was typically a large stone enclosure with no roof and only one opening. At night, several different flocks of sheep would be led into this enclosure that was guarded by a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper wouldn't let anyone into the pen except a shepherd of one of the flocks. And then in the morning, the shepherd would come and call his own sheep to come out of the pen. Now, the sheep would know that it was safe for them to come out of the gate and to go to the pasture because they knew the voice of their own shepherd and trusted him. If another shepherd came and called his sheep, they would know not to respond. And if a thief came, forget it, those sheep aren't following. This is the relationship that a shepherd would cultivate with his sheep. When the shepherd sends the sheep into the pen at night, he knew that they would be safe because they wouldn't come out through the gate for anyone but the shepherd. This is why the writer of Psalm 23 could say, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me," because that's how the sheep would feel about their shepherd. When Jesus confronts the religious leaders who thought they could throw someone out of fellowship, it's telling them that he goes to this picture of the gate to the sheep pen. What he is saying to them is that they aren't the gatekeepers of the blind man. They don't get to decide who's in and who's out. Jesus is the gate. In the next few verses, he takes it even further and says that he's the shepherd. This whole thing started because Jesus and his disciples met a man who was blind from birth. A person in that society, not unlike our own, who was born with such a disability, was among the most vulnerable and derided of people. They found him sitting near the temple. Why was he there? Because he was begging, because there were no other means for him to get income. And every day while he begged, people like the disciples walked by and judged him, assumed that he was in this mess because of something that he did, because he deserved it. And when Jesus healed him, instead of wrapping their arms around him and welcoming him in, the religious leaders said, "No, you were steeped in sin at birth and we do not receive you now." And to that denial of care and acceptance of the most vulnerable, Jesus said what Jesus always says to the powerful when they turn away from the suffering: "You are the thief who comes only to kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly." The pen is a place of protection for the most vulnerable of creatures. The gatekeeper is trusted by the shepherd to care for the sheep, to keep the thieves out at night when the lambs are the most vulnerable. If the church is to be like Christ, our good shepherd, then being faithful gatekeepers is our mission in this world. So what might that look like? Well, as Spirit would have it, we actually get a glimpse of what a church that is functioning in this beautiful role does look like in one of our other lectionary passages for today, which is Acts 2, verses 42 to 47. So I'm going to read that real quick for us. As they, that is the church, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Friends, this early church was full of people from all walks of life and stratuses of society, rich and poor, slave and free. They didn't do it perfectly, but they strived to look out for not themselves, but each other. The wealthiest among them sold their stuff to make sure that the poorest were cared for. This is the love of Christ. This is our good and high calling, to love the most vulnerable and to say to any power that would declare them beneath our concern, I have come that they might have life. So I typically shy away from practical application when I preach. I'm not always sure that it's my place to tell people what to do with the word when they hear it. But as our emails keep telling us, we're in unprecedented times in our lives. And so I have some practical invitations for you today, because we have an invitation to love our most vulnerable neighbors in practical ways like never before. So our state is moving right now to open our economy. Over the next weeks and months, you are going to have lots of opportunities to make choices about when to go out and for what. So I'm going to ask you to continue to make choices to limit your own freedom and comfort in service of our most vulnerable neighbors. And when you do go out, I'm going to ask you to wear a mask. So this is a funny thing, this mask business, because I think when the idea of wearing masks first came up, our immediate thought was, of course I should wear a mask to protect myself from other people. But what we've been learning is that that isn't actually the main reason for non-medical people, like most of us, to wear a mask. We actually need to do it to protect other people from ourselves. Because of the nature of this virus, many of us could have it and be able to spread it around and have no symptoms, and therefore no knowledge that we're spreading it. So by staying home as much as possible and wearing a mask when we do need to go out, we are engaging in a profound act of solidarity with our most vulnerable neighbors, those who, if they were to contract it, would not carry it asymptomatically, but would very likely become very sick and quite possibly die. We do this because we say that your life is more important to me than my comfort. So by doing these simple and uncomfortable things, we are saying to the most vulnerable, we love you and we want you to have life and have it abundantly. I love this community. I love and miss all of you so dearly, and I look forward to the day when we can safely gather again. But for now, I would like to just offer this little prayer for us. Okay. Holy Shepherd, you know your sheep by name and lead us to safety through the valleys of death. Guide us by your voice, that we may walk in certainty and security to the joyous feast prepared in your house when we celebrate with you forever. Amen.